Alright, we're going to do the Eternity tail boom build video. Basically putting the V-tail servos into the tail boom. I've done my strong model first, so you can kind of see how this gets set up. We have the two servos in here and a Dean's connector right here. Now every model's got its little quirks, and you know, I haven't built one of these before, so I kind of learned a few things doing this one, and I'm going to do some things a bit differently on the other models I'm building. So just a quick recap. This is a mount that comes with the kit for KST A08 servos, which are these guys here. And I thought that maybe the X08s fit, but you'll have to do a little bit of work on these to get them to fit, so really not a big deal. If you slide these in here, you can see the motor kind of hits this part right here. So just take your Dremel and grind a little recess there for the motor if you want to use an X08 in these blue frames. Otherwise, you can buy the same thing from Servo Ramen specifically for the X08, which fits perfectly. I have these on my site. Maybe I'll leave a link in the description. But I am going to be putting X08s in one of the models, and I'm just going to slightly modify this to get it to work. Okay, so basically the kit just comes with this mount and this kind of carbon mount for the Dean's plug. To connect the push rods to the servo arm, Boho recommends these tiny MP jet clevises. These are the small clevises. I think they're the 17mm clevises. And he recommends putting, I'll just grab this carbon piece because it's got some contrast. He recommends putting the clevis on the second hole from the center. It'll be the second hole right there. And the way the horns are on the tail, that wouldn't really give you a whole lot of servo travel to get maximum deflection. So what I did with my first boom that I built is I used the first hole here, and you can't really use a clevis if you're using the first hole because it basically will only go one way before it hits this hub here. So I'm going to use L bends, and for the L bends I have some wire. This is I believe this is 1.3mm wire. I'm going to use that to make the L bends, and then I have some stainless steel tubing that the wire fits in. And so this will be a sleeve to attach the L bend to the carbon fiber push rods. So yeah, I don't know why the kit doesn't have these clevises, but if you want to use these clevises, you got to get these, and if not, just use some L bend stuff and you can get the stainless steel tubing and this wire on Amazon or wherever your local source is. Alright, so the first thing I did is I kind of modified the carbon mount here, so I'll just zoom in on it. You can see I cut out a section here, and I had to do some sanding. You see the edges of that? It's kind of beveled. So I basically sanded a bevel on there. This is how it comes. You can see it's kind of rough, and it doesn't really fit. So just sand it till you get a good fit. I put the bevel in there so I get a better gluing area, and I made this cutout kind of to help mount the servos, and I'll get to that later. I'll show you what I'm thinking, because I ran into a problem with the first boom that I built, and I think that will address it. Alright, so inside the fuselage here, I did take my Dremel with a sanding drum, and I just kind of real gently went around the inside edge about 3mm, because there are some ripples and buildup in the layup, and it won't let that carbon piece fit in there nicely. So I just cleaned that up a little bit with this sanding drum here, just like this. Just took a few seconds. And now we can get a pretty decent fit on here, like that. Alright, so let's move on, and I'm going to basically prep these frames for the servos, and I'm going to do the same thing to this guy that I did to this guy because I'm building 2 booms. So I'm doing some prep work to get these servo frames ready for bonding, and I just wanted to show you, this is the A08 servo. It fits in the frame perfectly. And then this is the same frame with an X08, and as you can see, all I did was just grind a little portion there for the motor to get clearance, and that's all, and it fits perfect. Okay, now I've also done some sanding inside here to roughen this area up for bonding, and there was a few ripples, I think from the balloon when they make these, and just smooth that stuff out. And I used some kind of homemade sanding implements. This is just a dowel with some 80 grit sandpaper, and I also have this stick here with some sandpaper glued onto it, and you can see the bevel there at the end. Okay. Alright, so one thing I noticed with the with my original build on my Strong is that the push rods that go in here, the height from the floor of the boom is good if you want to use that 2-hole position with that small clevis, with this small clevis. But to lower it down, it does kind of bend the push rods down a bit. It puts a little bit of strain on there, and I want to make everything as like easy moving as possible, as free moving as possible. I don't want to put any undue strain on the servos or the carbon push rods. So to remedy that, what I've done is I've got some scrap bits of 1.3 millimeter carbon rod. This is just a old push rod from a crashed plane. It's 1.3 millimeter, and what I did is, see, I just glued that right kind of to the apex of the frame, just to act like as a spacer. And then I've sanded these frames down on these surfaces, and I sanded the carbon rod a bit and glued it on there with some super glue. And I kind of took a sanding block and just see if I can show you. I just kind of sort of flatted that side off of the carbon real lightly, like that, just to kind of match this contour, and that effectively raises this frame up in the boom slightly and gives us better alignment with the push rods. Alright, I think I got the booms and these 2 servo mounts basically ready to bond. So what I'm going to do is, just got a paper towel here with some alcohol on it, and I'm just going to clean this up and get all the dust and everything off there, so we get a good clean bonding surface on everything. And I'll do the same thing for these guys. just to be sure. Got a Q-tip here. See how dirty that comes out. Alright, I'm basically ready to glue this servo tray in the boom, but what I want to do is make sure it's about 3 millimeters back from the edge and that it's level. So there's a flat spot here and a flat spot on the tray. So you can use that, you know, those two flats are parallel and the tray is level. I want to make sure it's level. And then I'm just going to take a paint pen and make some marks so I know where to apply the epoxy. You can kind of see my paint pen trace of the frame in there. It's on both sides. Hard to see that side, but it's on both sides. So I don't want any epoxy to go over those lines. So I'm going to put a little bit on the boom and some on the tray. This is my epoxy here. This is a polypoxy. I got it from Aircraft Spruce. Really high quality 24-hour cure epoxy. And there's a little bit of Cabosil mixed in here to make it fairly thick, a little bit thicker than mayonnaise, and this is what I'm going to use. Just have a little scrap piece of carbon fiber rod. And I'm going to go ahead and put some epoxy in here. I'm not going to go crazy with this because I'm going to put some on the tray as well. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply some onto the tray. I think that should about do it. Now I'll have to very gingerly slide this guy in here, keeping it somewhat high, and then dropping it in. And then I'm going to just move it around a little bit and make sure it's level, because it's way off right now. Okay, you can see it's pretty level, and I have a little cleanup work to do. I gotta clean up that excess epoxy right there, and from the inside, that's kind of what it looks like. I don't have any epoxy really coming up over the edges of the tray, which is good because I don't want it to interfere with the servos. So I'm just going to go ahead, everything's in place, and do a little bit of cleanup work. Well, I've glued up both booms, so the trays are in there. Went around and just cleaned the little stray epoxy here and there. Really don't want it to get in the areas that the output shafts or the servo arms are. So if you have any epoxy, like if you have any epoxy bleeding through like these areas here where the servo arms go, just take a Q-tip with some alcohol and clean it up. And for the X08s, same thing where the end of the motors are. Just go and clean that up a little bit, just so you're sure that the servo will fit in there. If you have a little bit of epoxy hanging out, you can always grind it with a little Dremel bit at the end, but getting it now while the epoxy's still wet is much easier. And like we said, I left a little bit of gap here at the front, about 3 millimeters, maybe 2.5, for those plates that are going to get bonded in here. So we're going to go ahead and let this dry till tomorrow, and then we're going to put the V-tails on and cut the push rods to length, and hopefully get the L-bends on and the servos in. Alright, the servo mounts are dry, the epoxy's dry, and before we can hook up the servos to the push rods, we have to do some work back here. Unfortunately, if I show you the V-tails, they have really good up travel, but almost no down travel whatsoever. So you can see right here that the push rod hits the fuselage in this area. I find this pretty annoying. I think it should come from the factory, you know, with all the control surfaces being able to get the proper travels. So, I mean, you could hook it up and just jam the servo down and it'll probably go down, but, you know, you're going to strain your servo a lot. So, we're going to have to do some work right here. So, I've done that already to one of the booms that I'm building. So, let me just show you what that looks like. You can see these cutouts that I've made right here to allow some clearance. So there's a little bit of filing work and grinding with a combination of Dremel and files. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright, so basically I'm gonna deflect the surface down, and I have a paint pen here, and I'm just gonna mark the fuselage where it rubs. And we'll do that on both sides. And now I'll take the tails off and start working on those areas. I just want to show you that it's really easy to get these push rods out. You don't have to really worry about putting them back in. They go back in really easy. So go ahead and pull those out. and set them aside while we do this work to the back end of the V-tail. Dremel tool with a little grinding bit. That's just to kind of get it started. Round file. Now you really want to kind of come at it at this angle, almost parallel with the boom, because I'm trying to remove some material on the inside here to get more clearance. So I don't want to be coming at it like this, like perpendicular to the boom. So I'm basically staying parallel to the boom, and I am working material kind of all through here on the inside. And then once we get some material removed, I'm going to go ahead and put the tails back on and see what kind of movement we have. Alright, let's check movement. This side's pretty good. This side still needs a little bit of work. I'm going to go ahead and mark this where it needs some more work. And we'll just get back to the file. I think one more round and it should be pretty good. Okay, here's kind of what we ended up with. There's only a few minutes of work, but I really wish it would have been done from the factory. So let's go ahead and put the tails back on. Alright, finished up with all the work back here. Just show you how this works. Getting good travels. So now we're going to move on to hooking up the servos to these push rods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the control surfaces so they don't move. I got some tape here, both sides, and a little bit on the bottom, just so the surfaces don't move. And now we can move on to the servo side of things. So we'll just test fit these servos, make sure they go in, nothing's holding them up. Kind of a bit of a pain. That one's in, and one more here. There we go. They're both basically in there. Now I'm going to prep the L-bends and the sleeves. Okay, I've prepped the parts for the L-bends and the sleeves. So here we have, this is a 1.3 millimeter rod with an L-bend in it. You can use 1.2 to 1.5 millimeter rod, whatever you have, whatever you can find will be fine. And I don't know if you can see here, but I've actually ground some divots in this rod with a cutoff wheel, and then I've sanded the bonding area with 80 grit sandpaper just to aid adhesion when we glue these parts together. So I have two of those, and these are my stainless steel sleeves or couplers. I've scuffed the outside with 80 grit, and as you can see, I've cut two little slots in them, not all the way through, just enough so I can get to the inside, and that again will aid in adhesion. The epoxy will squeeze out of those holes, and we'll get some more surface area to bond with. So I have two of those, and I've also prepped a horn. So this is the horn I used, and I'm using the first hole here, which is 5 millimeters from the center. Boho recommends using the second hole, which is 7 millimeters, with that little tiny clevis. But again, I found just through some testing that you don't use hardly any servo travel when you use that second hole. So that's why I'm going to the L-bends with the first hole here. So here's my servo arm. As you can see, I'm using the first hole, and I have... See, I've kind of put a chamfer on this edge here, just to help with clearance on the boom. So just took my Dremel and just chamfered this slightly. And yeah, we're basically ready to go. One quick thing I wanted to make you aware of is when you put your servo together. So for the L-bend, oh, I should say I also drilled this hole out to 1.3 millimeters. So if we put our L-bend in here, just put this down. You want to make sure that the end of the L-bend doesn't extend over the servo, because obviously when the arm moves, this will hit the case and it'll bind up, possibly damage a servo. So you want to trim these, you know, so that you have about 1 millimeter of gap here between the case and the end of this. And the fuselage wall is going to end up being, you know, really close to this. So it's not going to back out. There's no way it's going to back out. Okay, so now that we have all these parts prepped, I'm gonna go ahead and do another horn, because I only did one, and then we can work on cutting the push rods. Okay, so I've just centered the servos and installed the horns, making sure they're perpendicular to the servo. Done that on both. And now I'm gonna go ahead and push these into the mount, and we're gonna mark the push rods. Okay, we're gonna mark the push rods now. I actually used my template that came with the kit to make sure the tails were centered, and they're taped up. And I'm gonna use a silver paint pen. And I know it's difficult for you guys to see this, but I'm kind of limited with my workbench and my camera setup, but I think you'll get the idea. I'm just gonna mark the carbon push rod directly at the servo arm or horn, right where the hole is. Okay. Do the same on the other side. Let that dry a little bit. Once that paint pen is dry, I'm going to take the tails off and pull the push rods out. Okay, I just pulled one push rod out. I'm going to do this one at a time because my parts that I made aren't exactly the same dimensions. So I don't want to confuse the parts once I start making these marks and cutting the push rod. So I've lined up the L bend with the silver mark, and I'm just going to make another mark at the end of the L bend here, and I'm going to cut the push rod right there using a cutoff wheel. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kind of file the end. Alright, now these stainless sleeves that I have, they're actually almost the same diameter as the carbon rod, so I'm going to sand a taper in these carbon rods. This is just because this is all I had. You can get slightly larger ones and maybe they'll just go right over. If you can't find these stainless steel rods, you can try to use glue syringes. Like these adhesive syringes, you could probably find these on Amazon or something, the right size, and just cut the ends off. Also, this process will obviously roughen up the push rod to promote adhesion. And then I'll just test fit sleeve. Okay, it's getting pretty close. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to take the edge of my file here. I can zoom in for you. I'm just going to kind of grind in a few notches. Again, this is just to help the adhesive get a good bond. And then I'm going to clean this up with some rubbing alcohol. Okay, so here's basically what the setup looks like. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a little bit of mold release wax. If you don't have mold release wax, you can use Vaseline or beeswax or even chapstick or something. Just have this ratty Q-tip. Here's the wax I'm using. And I'm just going to put some on the inside of the boom here. Kind of where that sleeve is going to be next to the boom, just because inevitably we will get some adhesive, you know, stuck to the boom, or because this is kind of a tricky process. So I just want to make sure that if we do get some parts sticking, that it'll just pop right off and it won't be a big deal. And I come back and clean this up later. Okay, again, I'm doing this one side at a time because I don't want to mix up my parts. Now I'm going to mix up some JB Weld. Slow cure JB Weld. It works great. I've used it for years on doing bonds like this. Never had a failure. So I'll go ahead and mix that up, and then we'll get this push rod installed. All right, this part's a bit tricky. I have my sleeve here, and I'm using a pin, T-pin, and I have my JB Weld mixed up, and I'm just going to use my pin to get some of this JB Weld in the sleeve. Kind of go at it from both ends. Okay, I've already put that push rod back in and hooked it up at the tail, and now I'm going to try to get the sleeve on there. So I'll put that down for a minute. Doing this while I'm filming is a major pain in the butt, actually, but see if I can make it happen here. I think I need to turn this around. I don't want to crimp this tube because obviously it won't go on. I'm just going to try to get it over the carbon rod. There we go. Now I got to do the servo side. So kind of forgot how I did this the first time, but again, you want to make sure the servo is centered. I'm going to put the L-bend in here. I might put some JB Weld on it for good measure. Oops, didn't want to do that. Okay, get this stuff out of the way. I'm going to try to start there we go, it's in there. See if we can get this guy in place. If the servo arm moves, you'll have to recenter it, but I think we're looking pretty good here. Nice. All right. I don't know if you can see this. Got some JB Weld oozing out, which is great. That means we got enough in there. And I might just put a little bit over here. Again, we can come back and clean some of this stuff up a little bit. And it's definitely touching the side of the fuselage, but that's why we put the mold release there. All right, that's one done. All you have to do is repeat that process for the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. All right, so next day, and the JB Weld we applied has dried, and what I'm going to do now is, well, actually, it did get glued to the side of the fuselage because it's really hard to keep a clean install here because you have no space to work. But since we put the mold release on there, it just popped right off. So there's no JB Weld on the fuselage, but there's a little bit of excess buildup on the sides here. I want to smooth out just so when the servo's going back and forth, you know, it doesn't hang up on something or rub or whatever. So I'm just gonna take my file and just smooth these out a little bit. If we rotate the L-bend kind of how it goes into the servo, like that, we'll see kind of where it stuck to the fuselage, and we can get those areas. Obviously I've taken the servos out, and I've also taken the V-tails off, just so we get more slack on the push rods here, so they're easier to work with. And you don't have to go too crazy with this. Just get them smoothed out a little bit. I'm thinking probably pretty close to being good here. Call that good. Alright, I'll go ahead and do the other side of the push rod, and then I'm going to put the tails back on and the servos back in, and we'll see how much throw we get. Alright, I think the servos have been removed and installed for the last time, so hopefully they can just stay there. And you'll notice that I've shortened these wires a bit. So this is how much I cut off. So I cut them down and recrimped on some connectors. That's really optional, guys. It's just if you're super crazy and you want to kind of save 1 or 2 grams, you can go ahead and do that. And it keeps things cleaner here because you don't have as much wire bundled up here. So let's put the tails back on and check out the throws. Alright, you can see we get plenty of throw. I'm still only using maybe half the available travel from the servos, so the shortest the arm you can get in there, the better, really. Alright, we're going to work on making the connection from the servos to the nose pod. This is the carbon kind of bulkhead thing that the kit comes with, and this top hole here is for a Dean's plug. Now the kit comes with this parts bag, and it's got 2 Dean's female connectors. But it doesn't come with the male ends, so I'm not really sure what these are for. Maybe they're for the wing. I don't know, but we're gonna use a Dean's set for the boom and the pod. So I'm going to use the male end, this guy here, for the boom. And I wanted to talk about something real quick regarding this connection to the nose pod. You could just clip your servo connectors and solder directly to the Dean's plug. That'll work just fine. If you're a sport flyer, you know, that might be the way to go. If you're going to do that, I would not install this bulkhead because the Dean's connector is supposed to be glued in here. So I would omit that, solder on your Dean's plug, and just let the wire hang out here out of the front of the boom. Now, the reason why I say that is because if you're like a contest pilot, or you're like, if you're pretty serious about flying in F5J competitions, I highly recommend that you set these servos up so you can remove and replace them if needed, to if you have a servo burn up or whatever. I'm saying this from experience, flying my Vertigos. I had occasion where one of my tail servos in the boom of my Vertigo just stopped working. It had been in the model for 4 years, so I got my money's worth. But it was in the middle of a contest, it stopped working, and I had to replace it. And I had the wires just soldered directly to the Dean's plug, and I literally had like 5 minutes between rounds to try to replace that, and it was just a giant nightmare. So if you're a contest flyer, set this up in a way that you can replace the servo easily. And that's what we're going to do here with a small sub harness. Now, this is the retaining plate for the servos, so it goes on top of the servos, and there's 3 screws, so one screw is going to go in here, one in the middle, and one up here. Now if you glue the Dean's plug in, you have just no access to that screw, the front screw, because the Dean's plug and the wires are directly over it. So the first strong boom that I built, I drilled an access hole here and an access hole here, and the thought was I could just put the screwdriver through the holes and mount the plate, and that was all fine. But when I mounted this in with the Dean's plug, I couldn't get to this plate. So I'm gonna replace this with a piece of G10 fiberglass. This is about 1 millimeter thick. You could use a piece of plastic, a piece of thin plywood, whatever you want. And so the idea with this is going to be, I'm just going to use the rear hole and the middle hole, so these 2 holes, and I'm going to extend the front, so the front will kind of hang out here, and I'll cut a notch where it'll kind of go under the plate, and the plate will retain the front. So I'll slide it in. This plate will retain the fiberglass, and then I'll run 2 screws here to hold everything together. So again, if you're going to be contest flying, I always recommend with all your planes, you know, even your wing servos and stuff, make sure you build in such a way that you can replace the servos quickly at the field. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and make a small sub harness for the boom. Alright, this is what I got for the little tiny sub harness. So this will be in that plate here, and these connectors will plug into each other, and then I'm going to double-sided tape them to the mounting plate once the mounting plate is installed. So now that this is done, we're going to probably install this into the bulkhead here, and then glue the bulkhead in, and we're really close to being done. Okay, this is that piece of G10 fiberglass. It's 1 millimeter thick. I showed you this earlier, and I'm going to replace this plastic retaining plate with this guy here. So I've already drilled my holes, and I just used the plastic one to get the measurements and mark it up and all that. And I have about 10 millimeters of excess material on the front side, so this side here. So I need to drill an access hole up here to be able to get the screw in. So I'm just going to get the spacing on these screws. It's looking like 30 millimeters, and I need a paint pen. These out of the way. And I'm just going to eyeball this. I'm going to put the straight edge on the seam of the fuselage, and kind of just look straight down from the top of it. Ten, 20, 30. So something right about here. Like that. And I'm going to go ahead and start a hole there, and I'll start with start with the Dremel tool, and this is like a 1mm cutting bit. I like to use this on composite parts. And then I'm going to move on to the drill. I think I already have a 2mm drill bit in my drill. Then I'll go up to probably 3mm. It's good. Now I'm going to go back to my Dremel tool with kind of a tapered grinding bit. Like that. I think that's about all we'll need. Alright, now I'm going to work on kind of putting a notch in this guy to help retain this plate. So I'm just going to kind of put it in where it needs to go. And then I'm going to mark the front. So I'm going to start small, take off a little bit at a time. I'll just do that off camera. I'm going to be using just a flat file, I think. I think the file will be good enough. Maybe I'll use a Dremel tool. Alright, got a little notch in there. So when this plate gets glued in there, that notch will retain this front of this plate. And the next thing I want to do is I got to open up this hole slightly for the Dean's connector because it doesn't really go in, or it'd be a super tight fit. So I'll work on this. Got a square file here. Kind of work on the corners. Kind of goes in. Just need to open up the bottom and the top a little bit, not much. There we go. So that's going to go in there from the back, and eventually this will get glued in. And speaking of gluing in, now would be a good time to scuff this up. Basically, right in here is going to be the gluing surface. This is going to get slid in to the plate. These little lips will stop it. So what I'm going to do for that is go ahead and put my tiny little 1mm grinding doohickey on the Dremel. I'm just going to kind of scuff up in here. I'm actually put a few notches in this lip. And for good measure, take some coarse sandpaper. Just give it a quick once over. That should do it. Alright, getting real close to being done here. I'm going to move on to gluing this piece into the boom, and at the same time I'm going to glue the Dean's connector into this bulkhead. But for now, we have the plate bolted in, and for now I'm just going to put this in place. Just kind of hold it there, and I'm going to grab my pencil and just draw a line. And I'm going to go ahead and just trim off this excess here with the Dremel tool. And then 220 sandpaper. Just kind of clean it up a little bit, and I might round the edges slightly. Alright, let's get to gluing here. I got the same kind of epoxy mixture that I used to bond the servo tray in the boom. And first thing I'm going to do is get some on the Dean's plug here. Don't need a whole lot. I'm going to put this in the plate, but I got to look at my other boom because I want to make sure that they're all in the same orientation. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but just kind of weird like that. So put it in this way, and I've wiped all the edges off with alcohol, the plug too, in here. So it should be pretty good for bonding. Just push it all the way till it's flush. That's kind of what it looks like. And I'm just gonna go kind of put a little more on the top side here. Kind of make sure that it lips over the back. Okay. On the bottom side, you want to make sure that there's nothing getting into this notch where that hold down plate's going to go. So just put this aside, and then I'm going to go on to the boom. I have the plate, the hold down plate installed, so that'll just help keep everything in alignment. And I'm going to go ahead and put some of this epoxy on the edge all the way around. If you get some on the outside, it's not a big deal. We'll wipe it down later with some alcohol. See if I can change this. There we go. Oops. Okay, it should be good enough. Don't have to go overboard. And now I'm gonna put this guy in. So I'm just gonna, maybe I will just wrap the connectors up with some tape just to be safe. Make sure it's fully seated. Just gonna slide this in. You should probably wear gloves, but I'm not because I'm dumb. Oops. And don't push on the Dean's plug. It's looking good. I could probably just leave it like that because it's seated pretty well. But I'm going to actually put some tape on this, but first just going to wipe the edges. And that's basically it. And just set it aside and let it cure. Make sure the Dean's plug's fully seated. And I'm gonna let this sit overnight. Okay, it's the next day, so our epoxy is fully cured. Just get rid of the tape. And we can see what we got. Pretty good. A little bit of epoxy escaped out of the very corners, but just knocked that down with my thumbnail or a little bit of sandpaper. Not much to worry about there. Anyway, just about done here. Got one last thing I'm gonna do just to keep it tidy and try to keep the wires from fouling on the servo arms and everything. Just grab my leads out. I got a roll of double-sided tape. I'm just going to cut a little square off. A little tiny piece, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this right over top of this connector here. Just zoom in a little bit. Try to get the backing off here. A little tricky because it's such a small piece. Yeah. And then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of lay my other servo lead right on top of this guy. Just squeeze them together. Now, turn this around. Grab some hemostats here and gonna plug in the sub harness and make sure you got the wires going the right way. So I'm gonna have to grab it like this. Oops. Push it. Maybe hemostats aren't the right tool for this job. I'll try some needle nose. not much room in here, so it's kind of fiddly. There we go. Again, just double check to make sure my wires are plugged in the right way. I'll try to get the second guy in here. Just works better with my fingers, I think. There we go. Okay. Now that that's done, I'm going to take a little piece of electrical tape, about 30 millimeters long or so. And I'm just going to wrap this over the top so you can pull. There we go. And I want the seam to be on the bottom side. Like that. And that just covers the exposed connectors here, just in case, you know, a piece of carbon or something falls on them or whatever. Now I have another piece of double-sided tape, and I'm just going to stick this guy on the bottom side. And again, we'll have to try to get the backing off, which is not as easy as it sounds sometimes. There we go. Okay, looking good. Now I think I'll grab my pliers again, and I'm gonna grab it from up here and kind of shove it more forward. And just push it down onto the plate. Just like that. Make sure this wire is tucked up a little better. That was fine. There we go. Alright. Boom is all done. Alright guys, well that's it. That wraps up the V-tail and the boom build. I did 3 at the same time. Basically, started with this one, which is my performance boom, and kind of learned the, use this to kind of figure things out. You can see I have a hole here that's not needed. That's okay. And then we have 2 light booms here. By no means do I want this to be a definite how-to video. This is just something that'll get you familiar with the way this Eternity boom goes together, how the servos go in. Do whatever you want. Just use this video to get some ideas and maybe come up with your own ideas on how to get everything in here real neatly. And some of the stuff in this video will definitely help you with other models. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching, and the next step on these Eternities is going to be putting the flap servos into the center panels, and I will see you guys in the next video.